secret things out. Yeah.
Now we're recording, we're good.
All right, there we go. So, for the last couple of weeks, and there's still one more next week, we have been talking about this book. I brought the real book now, so you guys can see it, real thing. Alan Verhey's The Christian Art of Dying, which has been an experience for me to read, because I haven't reflected an awful lot on matters related to death and dying, and ministry in that context. And as I think I told you a couple of weeks ago, it happens that I was reading this when there have just been so many deaths at Easter, of parents, of siblings. I talked to a woman, a good friend over this past weekend, whom I saw for the first time since her father died. Has it been a month or so ago now? She's been kind of out of circulation for a while. And she described just how difficult the last many months were, partly because of the medical system. She said her dad was not sick enough to be hospitalized, but not healthy enough to be at home. And so everybody kind of shuffled him off into different places, and it was unclear how to deal with it. And she just found to use the language that Verhey had introduced to us before, she had found the medicalization of death to be an immense part of the trauma of this whole thing that she's experiencing. So in any case, so it's been a good book for me to read. Last time we talked a little bit about the way that Verhey, this Duke University ethicist who died about 10 years ago, a little bit about the way that he, in this book, tries to set up a sort of contrast or a conversation between contemporary approaches to death and what we found in the 15th century. So in particular, he was focusing on the so-called ars moriendi, the art of dying, which, as you might remember, was sort of a genre of popular self-help literature in the 15th century, but also was the name, or is the name commonly used to describe one particular book, sort of an abbreviated version of this common self-help literature. How can you die well from a Christian vantage point? So he is setting up some conversation between older and more recent outlooks on how to do dying. And I'd said last time, we spoke last time primarily about the way that the ars moriendi, art of dying, the way that literature begins is usually with a commendation of death. So you might remember what is involved in that, right? The authors of that kind of literature usually began their work by saying, death is a hard thing, and we might tend to resent it, but in fact, from a Christian point of view, it's our best friend. It is the opening into eternity. It's leaving behind the ills of the body, that sort of thing. Okay, so we talked a little bit about that last time, and found ourselves especially recognizing, I think, maybe we could say two things. Verhey invites us to think about this. Recognizing two things. One is the sense in which it certainly is true that from a Christian vantage point, death is not surely something to be feared or to be run from or to be horrified at. In the Middle Ages, they talked about death being tamed. It was no longer the wild thing that is sheerly against us. And in that sense, says the ars moriendi, not Moriarty, sorry, moriendi literature. In that sense, maybe it's true that we can welcome death as a trusty, well-beloved friend in some cases. But we also found ourselves very aware of the sense in which if that longing for death becomes something that makes us despise this life, if we downplay the goods, the joys, the pleasures, the beauty of the world that we live in, the relationships, this sort of thing, we really do put ourselves in a situation where we're good disciples of Plato, but not great disciples of Christ. So isn't that the odd thing? On the one hand, death can be a sort of deliverance from suffering. On the other hand, death is biblically the last enemy that has to be defeated and that Christ has defeated and will defeat. And so you're always trying to do justice to both sides of that. All right, all of that from last time. The other largest element in the Ars Moriendi literature is the way that kind of literature treats particular sorts of temptations that are especially associated with death. So in the 15th century, the standard way of talking about this was to say the period, not death itself, but the period of dying, dealing with the process of dying, whether in myself or in someone that I love, is always something that has peculiar temptations that are related to it, right? The sorts of things that maybe you don't encounter, or at least don't encounter in the same way in other contexts. So Ars Moriendi invites us to reflect on how we go about doing this dying process that of course we all will do in one way or another, how we go about doing it well. I think a lot of times, in our day, we tend to think that an instantaneous death is the best kind. You don't have to go through the process of dying. You just go from living and then you're hit by a bus or whatever it is, and it's over. And if you're a Christian, that means so I go to be with Jesus. But that was a terrible thing to think about in the ancient world, right? Or in the medieval period. They always said, I don't then have time to be prepared to meet my maker. I myself can't say goodbye to the people I love. Others can't. It seems as though there's all sorts of lack. So when we're thinking about not being hit by a bus, but instead about the what can be extended and can be very painful, of course, process of dying, how do we go about doing that well? The Ars Moriendi, as it's best known, talks about several temptations and the virtues needed to resist those temptations that are uniquely associated with dying. And I would like to invite us to look at a couple of those. But first, I wonder how, with the wisdom that's here around this table on this screen, I wonder how we might reflect from our experience, from our context, from things we've read, whatever, on what distinctive temptations or practices to counter temptations might be especially associated with the process of dying. I wonder whether we could see if we can put our finger on some things like that. In your experience, how can I ask the question? What is it from a spiritual vantage point now? I don't just mean the medical issues, of course, or something like that. How do you think about the spiritual health of a person who is dying? How do you address that? What are the unique sorts of issues that are present there? And how would you encourage someone to deal with that? You put it this way. Suppose I'm a 30-year-old guy in the prime of life when suddenly I get a diagnosis that says you have a year to live, and it's going to go by fast, and probably you're going to need to be in the hospital for a large part of that time. All right, God help us. As I think about the dying that's coming before me, what would you tell me to expect, or how to prepare or what to do.
Spiritual or?
That's what we're interested in. Yeah, not medical, but instead we're thinking, right, not just about the death, which I take it is inevitable for all of us, I hate to tell you. But right, that's so. Yeah, right.
Spoiler alert.
But it really is true, right? It's the spiritual death that we really fear, right? I take it that Christ has conquered that, but there are ways of living into that and there are ways of missing it. How do we live into Christ's life in the midst of death? What are the temptations to be aware of? What do you think of? I don't have a particular list.
I always enjoyed that. There was a great movie Michael Keaton did about the diagnosis, just like you said, where he had a timetable on there and different things he went through in that and sought out, different answers going through that.
Mhm.
But,
Does something particular stand out for you in that?
Yeah, so this is one of my own experiences. So in 2003, I had West Nile encephalitis, AAA.
Oh, wow.
They didn't know a lot about it. And I did get the cyclovir in a measured amount of time. My own experience, I remember being very much at peace. And I just look at that, I wonder if there's other people that have gone through or go through it and experience the same kind of peace. I was okay with it. I was really okay. They didn't know if I was gonna pull through at a certain time.
Okay. Yeah, other thoughts? Maybe I'll tweak that just a little bit to say, what we want to think about is not, I might die. What if you're in a context where you say, death is coming?
Yeah.
What do we do?
In the last few months that my wife Marjane was moving to an end, the pastor was talking to her in the hospital room. I was not there. He related this to me later. He said, Marjane said to me, I'm not afraid of death. I'm afraid of dying. Okay, the journey. And then in his reflections in the memorial service, he related that intersection, conversation with Marjane. And he said, your task right now, between now and death, is to demonstrate and to teach your kids how to die well. And an interesting, and she started with that. She was having lung problems and the lung was deteriorating. And so the last 2-3 months, 4 months, she was on oxygen at home. She was sitting in her chair in the living room, we were reading, and she said, Margaret, it was 10 years ago. She said, Margaret, I've asked my Lord so many times to touch my lung. And he hasn't done it. And I was sitting there as Bible scholar theologian, and I didn't have an answer. So that, the dying process is not only the person going through it, but the persons that surround that person. Trying to come to terms with going through the process.
Even 10 years later.
Yeah, 10 years later, most of the time I can talk about that time without getting choked up or whatever. But sometimes it just it traps you because there are so many places where there aren't any answers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And
Yeah.
Yeah, so in a way, this is exactly the question. When there aren't answers, what's the answer? You know,
Yeah.
so I just jotted down in particular the emphasis for Margine on fear of dying. She knew her savior,
Yeah, exactly.
but it's the process. And what's she afraid of then? The suffering?
No.
That's one thing. Am I afraid of how I'm going to let down my kids? Am I going to show them what faith looks like? Or is my witness somehow going to be compromised? Am I, you know, when the Lord does not answer this prayer about my lung, is this my God, why have you forsaken me? And you know, you can say that, I suppose, with faith, and you can say it with bitterness. How do I say it? Yeah. What else do you think of? Other thoughts?
I'll throw one. Oh, go ahead. No. This last week, I'm thinking of tuxedos. I'm not talking dresses here, because we're with guys. It's tuxedo time, not dress time. And actually, I am taking a new look at this thing and always thinking about how to introduce Jesus. But it's two tuxedos for me, two tuxedos. The first tuxedo will be when I die. So that tuxedo is all ready to go because I believe in Jesus, and the spots on that tuxedo are no more because he's taken them all away from me. And I'm very grateful to have a spotless tuxedo because of him. The second tuxedo, though, is for his return. When he comes back, I'm not going to be wearing, whether I'm in the ground or whether I'm living, I'm not going to be wearing the same tuxedo that I wore when I died. I'm going to be wearing a second tuxedo for his return, because that way I get to see all my friends get raising from the dead. I get to see those two tuxedos. So that's what I'll be there with a big smile on I think you guys will measure. I'll be there with a big smile on my face thinking of two tuxedos.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, again, just a quick point about that, right? I notice how, I mean, for a lot of people that I know, there is something about sort of meditation on tuxedos or meditation on the afterlife that is a tool for dealing with dying, right? But not for everybody. I mean, in my experience, some people don't want to hear about heaven because right now they're here on earth and it hurts like hell, you know? Yeah, so very interesting. Somebody else was going to say.
Go ahead, Ted.
As a Stephen minister over the years, I was blessed to be part of the process of dying for 4 or 5 people, all members of Wayne Presbyterian Church. And then my family members started dying away, and very few of them have the support, the internal support of a faith life. But I felt that bringing up Tony Campolo's sociological study of 50 people in their mid-90s, which used to seem like an old age, but doesn't any longer. But what would you be focusing on if you could live your life over? And the overwhelming wish was that they had started to create their legacy earlier on in life. And I've had that legacy of life discussion with non-Christian members of my family who are passing away. And I would rehearse with them decades of family services to the community, to society in general, just by their being who they were. And I found that very productive. And then secondly, the people like Dorothea who have a deeply grounded in their faith. And I had the conversation with her several months ago about what was on her agenda for heaven when she got there. And I hope I haven't said this too often in your presence, guys, but there was this fleeting smile across Dorothea's face. And she says, "Oh my goodness, just think of the wonderful conversations I'm going to have with your sister Patty, who passed away 40 years ago from brain cancer. And those two, weighing those opportunities, if you will, to discuss the satisfaction of a life well lived and the satisfaction of departing this life with real accomplishments on your dossier, I think have been very helpful for me.
Good. It was about 30 years ago, and I was in the Doctor of Ministry program at then Eastern Baptist, now Palmer, and I don't remember which class it was, but we had an assignment to write a letter to our family as if we had just gotten, medical diagnosis that we were going to die in a short period of time. And I remember writing it out, and I started weeping. I realized that I was writing about what I would miss walking my daughter down the aisle for her wedding, or meeting grandchildren, things like that. But I remember it also got me thinking about what are the events that have been most meaningful to me in my life. And it's probably too long for my family to really remember it and reflect on, but I probably was going up to all of them saying, oh, I remember when, you scored your first golden soccer day, or something with Lee. It probably was a pest in a way, but what I would say to someone is, who do you want to talk to in the time you have left, and what do you want to talk about?
Yeah, very telling. I want to dovetail in on what Ted said. How do I have to reflect back of how am I prepared to meet the Lord? On the lighter side, I'm reminded I would like to be buried in a Mercedes Benz. Remember that song? Oh Lord, won't you buy me a Mercedes Benz? So, I mean, obviously, that is just the opposite of what I was thinking of.
No, Bentley. You're going to be buried in a Bentley, not a Mercedes Benz, a Bentley.
I tell you what, Sandy, I'll take you up in those tuxedos.
Okay, sorry.
Tuxedo and a Mercedes Benz.
Come on.
No, my guiding thought, Sandy, and the rest of my fellow Bible studiers, is how do I prepare myself for that last day? Because I know I'm going to die. And as a Christian, I have a lot to learn. In that time, in that year that I'm given, 6 months to learn that. I think my guiding, my book right there would be the Bible. To get to know the Lord better than I have. Yeah, I have squandered it perhaps all my life. I should have read this Bible many, many times all the way through, but I haven't. What have I done with my life? So in my last, in that time given, I would probably like to, if the Lord's willing, to study, to pass on what I work, ask questions as how does this work? And maybe use my mother's Bible that she underlined with blue and red and red. I mean, every page is full of underlines. It's a second and third text or thoughts involved in her Bible study. I have not done that, and so I probably would want to work on my shortcomings. That's how easy that is, or how hard, difficult. I don't know. But I will try.
Yeah.
Craig, I didn't say something. Well, just a number of years ago, a guy called
How We Die. He's a doctor. And what I remember taking away from it was that he was talking about kind of the myth of the good death, meaning we sort of talked about it, you just sort of keel over the heart attack or whatever. Or, you have a chance to say, goodbye, everyone, way to go. He said, that's not how it happens for most people medically. It's ugly and nasty and all of these things. So what I took away from it, his message was, don't worry about having a good death. Try to live a good life, do the best you can while you're able to, and, for others and so on, how you treat other people. And then how you die, you don't have a heck of a lot of control over generally. So, focus on how you live. And I guess that's sort of similar, like what's your legacy, what did you leave behind?
But how do you do that when, I don't know what Margine's level of pain or suffering, but, one of our church members, Jane Lemon, wakes up every day with excruciating back pain, such that she is in tears most of the morning. What do you say to someone like that who's not only going to die, but is just every day is brutal? I don't know. I think I'm supposed to know, but I don't know. I just sit with her and just let her start talking.
This has been very, very helpful, guys. Just kind of, it reminds us of the whole variety, the whole cluster of issues that surround death, that have to do with life, that have to do with afterlife, that have to do with a process which sometimes involves intense suffering, and sometimes it's mostly just kind of waiting. There's just so many different things to have in mind. Let me turn us to the Ars Moriendi literature and see where there's connections and where not. So the standard Ars Moriendi approach suggests that there are usually 5 particular temptations that attend death, 5 areas of difficulty. And maybe we can look at 2 of them today, and then we'll do the rest next time. So Frank, this is where we can call up this document I sent you, if you don't mind.
Share screen.
Yeah, that's great. So 5 different temptations, and each one of them ends up being embodied in the Ars Moriendi literature in a couple of famous woodcuts. So there are actually 11 of them altogether, 2 for each of these temptations, and then there's kind of a final one where the patient moriens, they call it, which in Latin means dying, the dying one, So this is the first one. This is related to the first 2 woodcuts like this are related to the specific temptation that has to do with loss of faith. So of course, this is largely in a Christian context. That's not always the case for us, as Ted has kind of reminded us. In the Middle Ages it was, but in any case, one of the things then that is right at the heart of what many dying people face is questions about whether all this stuff that I believed is really true, right? So it's doubting the truthfulness of the faith. So in particular, can I just point to a couple of things here and you'll get the idea, right? What we're looking at here is, of course, the bedside scene. It's not a hospital in the 15th century, but it certainly is an area that's set apart. You'll notice, however, that though here's Moriens, the dying figure in his bed, right? You have to kind of get your orientation there a little bit. So once you get used to that, then you can start to see the other things that are around the bed. And maybe we're not surprised to find a few folks who are probably doctors. So they're all talking, what are we going to do, that sort of thing. But most of the rest of what's going on, we wouldn't ordinarily expect to be in the room, would we? But of course, in the 15th century, they tried to picture temptations and the interaction with spiritual realities in some way that we could see. So in addition then to what we've got here, you recognize the various devils, the creepy folks, I guess not here at the bottom, but creepy folks of various kinds that are involved in this death. But of course, it's not all bad guys. Up at the top, we see also the Virgin Mary. You see her praying hands here, and Christ robed in glory, and God the Father with the book of life. But here's the problem, of course, right? Remember, we're thinking about loss of faith as the kind of temptation. Here's the problem. You notice that they're behind the bed, and that means that Morians can't see the three that he needs most. They're present there for him, but he's not aware of it. And what we have instead is, look at the different devils with the Latin scrolls that kind of say what's going on, right? Here is a demon that is saying, there's a hell. Wonderful. All right, right? Here is this demon that's back here too, that seems as though he's trying to grab Morian's kind of bed sheets and all in order to get him to that hell. And as it happens, also pulls those sheets up to make sure that nobody can see the Father and the Son and the Virgin Mother, right? Or again, here, this is the demon here, apparently a female demon, who says, do as the pagans do. In other words, look around. You think yours is the one true faith? Look how all these folks are. Here are the, she is pointing over to the pagans who are bowing down before their statue, their little idol. And my goodness, there are crowns and they're in pretty good health. Everything's going fine. And you think you've got the answers? Ah, you get the idea? Or again, down here, here's at least a demon that pats Morians on the shoulder and kind of can console him a little bit. He consoles him by saying, just end your life. Just cut your throat, right? Or it's not quite clear what's going on here. It looks as though this is a partner to the one who's cutting his own throat. Maybe somebody who was involved in superstitious practices where if you flog yourself enough, you know, that attains some sort of spiritual merit, which was widely repudiated in the Middle Ages, even though we still kind of think of that as a medieval practice. So anyway, it looks as though here's temptations to give up the faith, man, just forget the whole thing, or go a different route, or just, you know, you're in trouble. This is terrible. All right. Is that what goes on in a when someone's dying? I think for some people it really is. So how do we go about dealing with that? Go to the next line, yeah, if you would. Right. So here is the same scene, still dealing with the temptations related to faith or the loss of faith, but it's looked at from a different angle. This is what we want to see, or we want Morians to see as he dies. So we still have the same guy, of course, lying in bed here, as you can see. But now we've got the Virgin Mother, and we've got Christ in his glory, and we've got God the Father, and they are out where Morians can see him, right? He knows that he's present, that they're present there for him. Here's in the background, you know, is this the whole company of the saints that are there waiting for him, helping him, going before him. In particular, I don't know if you like this guy. Anybody recognize this fellow with the horns?
The devil.
It looks that way, doesn't it? Moses, actually. Apparently, I didn't know anything about this. Apparently, there was a mistranslation of, would it have been the Latin text of Exodus when Moses came down from the mountain and his face shone. Do you remember that? And apparently some sort of mistranslation said he came down from the mountain and his face had horns. And so in some of the medieval literature then you find Moses drawn with horns. It's a sure sign you got Moses there. All right, so Old Testament, New Testament, all the company of saints there to welcome him. And the language here that we're getting from an angel that comes to offer comfort simply says, be firm in the faith, right? Faith is the virtue you hold on to in this case, right? Here's the Holy Spirit hanging out up here in the form of a dove. And we have some of these demons that were involved in the temptation, and I can't remember exactly what this says. Fugamus is let's get out of here or something like that, right? So the demons are scurrying. Here's one that says, oh, we're defeated. Here's one that says, it probably doesn't say this because, oh, I can't remember. That's not right. I looked this up. And, let's see what's going on there. Oh, he's saying it's all for nothing. It's all for nothing. All our work is demons. Look at all those temptations we did. Can you see what's going on there then? In some way, the suggestion in the 15th century is when you face dying, when you face not death, but the dying of it, expect that there will be temptations that'll make you say, faith, forget the whole thing. And see what you can do to surround yourself with those that encourage. See what kind of, what steps you can take to reinforce that. Seems as though it's something that we may want to do. We as ministers want to do. We, when those we love die, may want to do. You get the idea? All right.
Sounds kind of like Screwtape Letters.
Indeed, yeah, in a certain kind of way. You sort of want to peek behind the curtain and see some of the weird conflict that's going on there. Any thoughts about this? Just any response to this?
That one positive thing, I don't remember how you translate that Latin up there. Reminded me when you said it of the word by the Apostle Paul. I have finished the course. I have fought the good fight.
Right.
I have kept the faith.
Right.
You know.
Yeah. In fact, I mean, it's interesting that you don't find in most of these things biblical texts being quoted, though there are lots of biblical texts that are behind the scenes there in this, you know, and certainly, yeah, that would be one of them there. Yeah, it's a good point. All right, let's look. Can we look at one more pair of these engravings in order to see kind of what this is like? So we said this first temptation is a temptation to loss of faith. And of course, the virtue that you want to cultivate over against that temptation is the virtue of faith itself, standing firm. The second one that Ars Moriendi relies on is loss of hope. Maybe you can guess the third one: faith, hope. Any suggestions? Yeah, so we'll come to love. We'll talk about that next time. So this is loss of hope, which has to do now not with, oh, the faith is not true, but the faith doesn't really matter for me. It's talking in this case about me, or Moriens, who is aware of his own failings, and he finds himself saying, how can God forgive somebody like me? So maybe Christianity is true, maybe some people are going to heaven, not me, that kind of thing, right? So again, here's a picture of this same scene, different people going on. We have, maybe this is the dominant figure on the demonic side, you know, who holds up a scroll or a board, you know, with lots of things written on it and says, behold your sins. Look at all the sins you've committed.
Thank you very much.
Yes, I mean, right? And then all the others are talking about particular sins. So here, you have lied, you've perjured yourself. And here is probably, it looks like somebody that you have wronged. You notice how they're standing with their arms folded. So there's some sort of enemy that you've lied about or done harm to. Or here, you've committed adultery. And so this demon points to this woman that, who knows who that is, or whether there's a story behind that, right? You have, where are we? How about this fellow down here with the dagger? He says, you have murdered. And so he's got somebody here that he's about to stab. Do not ask me what's going on with his belly there. I don't know what the face is there. In any case, you've committed murder. Or the last one over here is saying you've been greedy, or you haven't been generous. And so we find somebody here that looks like a beggar sitting outside somewhere. Down here, someone with no clothes, though the demon has a nice full bag of gold right there that has not been distributed. You get the idea?
I was naked and you did not clothe me.
Exactly right. Exactly. I was hungry and you did not feed me. I was lying on the ground and you stabbed me. I don't know. There'd be lots that Jesus could add in there, right? So again, I wonder whether we have encountered in our interactions with folks who are dying this sort of awareness. I look back at my life, I look back at my legacy, and what I see sometimes is, oh, the sin at every turn. You know, look at all the years that I've wasted. Look at the places where I've gone wrong, sometimes maybe in quite horrible ways. Loss of hope's a real problem. One more. Last one we'll look at today. This is now the same scene when hope is interjected, not interjected, injected. That's the word I want. When hope is present. So notice the other kinds of things that we have going on here. We have got, well, of course, we've got an angel once again that has arrived on the scene in order to say, sorry about that, in order to say, that's not, oh, here it is, sorry about that. Oh, in order to say, never despair, that's the primary words that the angel brings. And so in that context then, what do we have? We see images here of what looks like Mary Magdalene, right? You can see the vessel of oil that she has, that she anoints Christ with, but who, according to the tradition that was followed then at least, was a prostitute. So you committed adultery. Well, so did Mary Magdalene, right? And yet there she is. You lied. You perjured yourself. Remember that? And here is the Apostle Peter with the keys of the kingdom, right next to the cock that announced his betrayal of his Lord. You see that? Or again, who else do we have? You murdered. Well, how about Saul of Tarsus, who murders and then ends up repenting and being the great servant of the Lord. Right here he is, knocked off his horse, of course. Or you were greedy. Here's the thief on the cross, who in the midst of his suffering turns to the Lord and things happen. And notice, of course, around this whole thing, and right where Morians can see it, the gates of heaven are open. They're open for you and for every sinner that's out there. You get the idea? Right? I think maybe we're not surprised just that we've got also then a few demons that are scurrying around saying, saying whatever they're saying. This is something like no victory for us today, or I've lost this one. That's what he says. So what are we gonna say?
I've not paid attention to the face or the change in his mien of Moyens.
Mhm.
Has he or she changed expressions?
Yeah.
Due to the different situations?
My impression is, yeah, it's a great question. My impression is not really. And isn't that sort of what you'd expect, right? I mean, there are times, of course, when you hope that my loved one who is lying in this hospital bed can smile or can really experience peace. But it's not always there, right? That doesn't always happen. There can still be real peace, even in the midst of the pain and the suffering. So I suspect that that's kind of what's going on there. Even where we don't see transformations, obviously externally, there are things going on in the spiritual world that are very different. So in any case, listen, we are, there are several other temptations like this that we'll look at for next time that take us in some other directions. What I appreciate about this is the awareness that as someone is dying, and as we've got in our age, as we've got all sorts of medical issues that we're trying to deal with, in the 15th century, without so many medical issues, medical knowledge and so forth, they were very aware that there were other issues that have to be dealt with. And in that sense, this strikes me as maybe a very positive sort of challenge to us to take seriously what matters of course, the medicine matters too. I'm not trying to downplay that. Well, maybe downplay it is right. Maybe if it's up here, I want it to come down a little bit. Doesn't mean that it's not, doesn't matter at all or that it's not good. But it does seem as though there are other large at work. And we want to be aware of that. And it seems as though in some way, we want those who are dying to be able to live into that well. See what I mean? It still is an open question how exactly that takes place. It's not like there's a recipe. Ars Moriens goes on as the book continues to give certain prayers that you can pray, or prayers that you can give to the dying so that they can pray. So there's some suggestions about that. But I know that some of you have more familiarity with actually being in those contexts and the kinds of things that maybe you can say, or the prayers you pray, or the biblical text that you go to. You know, you've got familiarity with all of that. It does seem that the key is somehow to recognize what's really going on. And it is not primarily something medical. It is primarily something spiritual, right? It's primarily someone who is preparing to meet God. Not just individually, but in community. That means that I, with this person who's dying, I also am close to the face of God, close to meeting God. So all of that somehow seems to be drawn together, I think, in a way that may have some weaknesses. We may want to talk some about that next time, but a few strengths as well. Listen, I would be glad to chat a little bit more about this. How about if I go ahead and pray for us so that we can have the official closing? And then if you'd like to stick around and talk a little bit, of course, I'd be very glad to do that. Okay? Should we pray? Holy Father, in Jesus' name, in many ways, these are things too large for me to think about. The immense realities unseen around us. We can't even deal with the seen realities very well. What about the unseen? But the Spirit of life is present, and Christ is raised from the dead, and you are always doing more than we recognize. So we pray that you will help us to make use of the tools, the means of grace. We pray that you will sustain us and those we love, and really the whole world. Will you help to sustain us in being faithful to your call, even in the midst of these challenging circumstances, the challenging days we live in all things. Here, as always, we belong to you and we trust in you. Go ahead of us so that we can trust even when our trust flags. So we give you thanks and pray that you'll go ahead of us this day into this world in the power of the gospel. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. According here.